We only keep her around because it looks good for the charity photos, babe. Otherwise, she is just dead weight. Honestly, the smell of her old lavender perfume makes me nauseous. It smells like a nursing home. Those words drifted from the kitchen of the expansive, glass-walled penthouse in the Seaport district of Boston, slicing through the ambient jazz music like a serrated knife. They were spoken by Serena, my daughter-in-law, the woman whose hand I had held through 3 false alarms of pregnancy, the woman for whom I had dipped into my retirement savings to buy a vintage lace veil because she wanted to look like royalty. I stood frozen in the hallway, clutching a silver tray of handmade bruschetta I had spent the entire afternoon preparing. The baguette was toasted to perfection, the tomatoes seasoned with basil I grew on my own windowsill. I waited, my breath caught in a painful hitch in my throat, waiting for Preston, my son, to defend me. I waited for him to say that his mother was not dead weight, that I was the reason he was standing in a $3 million apartment in the first place, that the very suit he was wearing was a graduation gift I had worked double shifts to afford. But all I heard was the clinking of ice against Crystal and Preston's low, dismissive chuckle. "Yeah, I know," he said, his voice dripping with a nonchalance that shattered my heart more than Serena's malice ever could. "Just bear with it for a couple more hours. Once the investors leave, we can call her an Uber. She is useful for the sympathetic backstory, the poor widow who sacrificed everything but God. She is exhausting to talk to. She has no idea how the real world works." I did not drop the tray. I did not storm into the kitchen screaming. I did not weep, though the pressure behind my eyes felt like a dam about to burst. Instead, a strange, cold clarity washed over me, numbing the trembling in my hands. It was the feeling of a fever breaking, leaving you weak but lucid. I quietly turned around, walked back to the catering table in the dining room, and set the tray down with precision. I smoothed the fabric of my dress, a navy blue chiffon I had bought specifically for this evening because Preston had told me it was a crucial night for his architectural firm and I needed to look presentable. I walked to the coat closet, retrieved my beige trench coat, and slipped out the service entrance. As the heavy steel door clicked shut behind me, sealing off the warmth, the laughter, the smell of expensive cologne, and the betrayal, I realized that Margaret Sullivan, the doormat, had died in that hallway. That was 2 weeks ago. The notifications started arriving on a Tuesday morning, shattering the quiet routine of my life. It began with a frantic text from Preston, asking why his supplementary credit card, the black card he loved to flash at dinners, had been declined at a business lunch with a potential client. Then came the automated emails from the bank alerting them that the joint investment account, the one I had funded religiously for 15 years, had been closed. Finally, the certified letter from the mortgage lender arrived at their penthouse, the one that would ultimately dismantle the illusion of their perfect life. But to understand the end, you must understand the beginning. My name is Margaret Sullivan. I am 68 years old, a retired head librarian who spent 40 years surrounded by the quiet dignity of books and the smell of old paper. I have been a widow for 20 years, ever since my husband, Thomas, died of pancreatic cancer, leaving me with a mountain of medical bills that eclipsed our savings and a 12-year-old boy named Preston who looked at me with terrified eyes. I raised Preston with a ferocity born of terror. I was terrified he would feel the lack of a father, terrified he would feel poor, terrified he would not have the opportunities his peers had. I worked my library shifts during the day and transcribed medical records at night until my fingers cramped and my vision blurred. I ate toast for dinner so he could have steak. I wore shoes with holes in the soles, filling them with cardboard in the winter, so he could have the latest sneakers to fit in with the popular crowd. I smoothed every path, removed every obstacle, and cushioned every fall. He was a brilliant boy, charming and ambitious, with a smile that could light up a room. He would draw me pictures of skyscrapers on the back of my transcription papers and promise that one day he would build a tower and name it after me. "Mom, you will live on the top floor," he would say, his eyes shining with childhood sincerity. "I will take care of you like a queen. You won't ever have to work again." I believed him. I believed him because I wanted to. Because a mother's love is often a blinding light that hides the sharp edges of reality. Preston grew up. He graduated top of his class from Harvard, a feat paid for by my remortgaging my small, triple-decker house in Dorchester and cashing in my life insurance policy. He became a successful architect, handsome and charismatic, the kind of man who walked into a room and owned it. I was bursting with pride. I thought we had made it. I thought the struggle was over. Then came Serena. She was a public relations specialist, a woman who viewed life through the lens of a curated social media feed. She was beautiful, sharp, and utterly hollow. She was the kind of woman who checked labels before she checked faces. From the moment we met, I felt her disdain. It was not overt at first. It was in the way she glanced at my sensible shoes, the way she interrupted my stories to check her phone, the way she reorganized Preston's life to exclude me. "Oh, Margaret, you wouldn't understand this," she would say with a tight, pitying smile when discussing art or politics. "This is from modern sensibilities. You are from a different, simpler time." Preston changed. It was a slow erosion. He stopped calling on Sundays. He stopped coming by for my Sunday pot roast. He became obsessed with image, with status, with acquiring things to fill a void that seemed to grow wider with every paycheck. When they decided to buy the penthouse in the Seaport District, a property far beyond their actual means, Preston came to me with tears in his eyes. "Mom, we need a guarantor," he had pleaded, holding my hands across my kitchen table, the same table where he used to do his homework. "It is just a formality. My liquidity is tied up in the firm. If you sign, it helps us secure the loan with a better interest rate. You know I would never put you at risk. I am an architect, Mom. I build things that last. Trust me." I signed. I signed because I trusted him. I signed because he was my son, and I still saw the 12-year-old boy who was afraid of the dark. 6 months later, he asked me to open a joint account. "For emergencies, Mom," he said. "I will put money in, you put money in, and if anything happens to either of us, we are covered." It is just smart financial planning. I deposited $2,000 a month into that account, my pension, my Social Security, everything I could spare after my basic bills. I thought I was building a safety net for us, a cushion against the harsh world. I did not check the statements. I did not want to pry. I wanted to be the supportive mother, not the nagging one. I was a fool. The night I walked out of their party, I did not go home to sleep. I drove through the rainy streets of Boston, the windshield wipers keeping time with the pounding of my heart. I arrived at my silent house, walked into my study, and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. I pulled out the file box I had been too afraid to examine for months. I sat under the harsh light of my desk lamp, put on my reading glasses, and went through every document, every bank statement, every contract. The horror came in waves, nausea rising in my throat. The joint account was consistently drained within days of my deposits. The transactions were sickening. $500 for a spa day, $2,000 for a designer handbag, payments for a luxury lease on a Porsche, dinners at restaurants where a salad cost more than my weekly grocery budget. They were living a millionaire's lifestyle funded by my pension, by the money I had saved from decades of shelving books. Then I looked at the mortgage papers for the penthouse. I read the fine print, the legal jargon that most people skim over. I was not just a guarantor. I was a co-signer with full liability. But there was a clause, a small paragraph on page 42 that Preston had clearly never read, but which I, as a librarian who had spent a lifetime organizing details, understood immediately. It was an acceleration clause based on the co-signer's asset security. It stated that, if the co-signer felt their financial stability was being compromised by the primary borrower's actions, or if there was a breach of trust regarding the collateral, they could petition for the loan to be recalled or the asset to be liquidated to satisfy the debt. I sat there until dawn. The papers spread out around me like the debris of a plane crash. I drank cup after cup of black coffee, watching the sun rise over the triple-decker houses of my neighborhood, watching the world wake up while my world had ended. I felt a profound grief, a mourning for the son I thought I had. But beneath the grief, a spine of steel was forming. My mother, Rose, had been a seamstress who raised 3 daughters alone during the Great Depression. She used to tell me, "Margaret, you can offer someone the shirt off your back, but you never let them skin you alive." I had let them skin me alive, but the flaying stopped today. At 9 in the morning, I called Arthur Penhaligon. Arthur was an estate attorney who had been a patron of my library for years. He was a shark in a tweed suit, a man who knew the law better than he knew his own children, but who had a soft spot for rare books and justice. "Arthur," I said when he picked up, my voice raspy from lack of sleep, "I need an appointment. Immediately. I have been the victim of financial abuse, and I intend to scorch the earth." I met Arthur at his office at noon. The mahogany desk between us felt like a barricade. I laid everything out. The transcripts of the insults I had overheard, which I had written down verbatim, the bank statements showing the theft of my pension, the mortgage documents. Arthur listened in silence, his face unreadable, his pen scratching notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly with a silk cloth. "Margaret," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "what you are describing regarding the joint account is essentially theft by deception, though difficult to prosecute criminally since his name is on the account. However, the mortgage. That is your weapon. You are the guarantor. We can prove that your financial status is being actively harmed by their spending habits. We can trigger the acceleration clause. The bank will demand full repayment within 30 days. If they cannot pay, foreclosure begins." "Do it," I said. "And the credit cards?" Arthur asked. "Cancel them. Today. Mark them as stolen if you have to." Arthur looked at me with a mixture of respect and concern. "You realize this is a nuclear option, Margaret. This destroys the relationship. There is no coming back from this. If we pull this thread, the entire tapestry of his life unravels. His credit will be ruined. His reputation will be tarnished." I looked out the window at the bustling street below, watching people rush to meetings, oblivious to the war starting in this office. I thought of Preston's chuckle. I thought of Serena calling me dead weight. I thought of the shoes with holes in the soles I wore so he could have Nikes. The relationship was destroyed when they decided I was nothing more than a wallet with a pulse, I replied, meeting Arthur's gaze. "I am just signing the death certificate." We initiated the process. I went to the bank that afternoon. I withdrew the remaining balance in the joint account, a pitiful $400 out of the tens of thousands I had deposited over the years. I closed the account. I canceled the credit cards linked to my credit line. Then, Arthur sent the formal notification to the mortgage lender invoking the security clause. For 3 days, there was silence. It was the calm before the hurricane. I spent those days cleaning my house, scrubbing floors until my knees ached, organizing bookshelves by the Dewey Decimal System, keeping my hands busy so my mind wouldn't scream. I knew the blowback was coming. I prepared myself like a soldier in a trench. It arrived on a Friday evening. My phone began to ring. It was Preston. I let it go to voicemail. He called again, and again. Then the texts started flooding in, vibrating the table every few seconds. "Mom, what is going on?" The card was declined. "Mom," the bank called. "They are talking about recalling the loan. Call me. Margaret, this isn't funny. Pick up the phone." "What the hell are you doing?" I sat in my armchair, sipping chamomile tea, watching the screen light up. It was fascinating, in a morbid way, to watch their arrogance turn into panic. Finally, after the 20th call, I answered. "Hello, Preston," I said, my voice steady. "Mom, are you insane?" he was screaming. I had never heard him scream at me before. The bank sent a notice demanding full payment of the mortgage, $2.5 million. They say the guarantor has invoked a security clause. What did you do? I took a sip of tea, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. I protected myself, Preston. I removed my financial support. Protected yourself? You are ruining us. We have a gala next week. We have investors coming. If the bank freezes our assets, we are done. Why are you doing this? Because I am dead weight, Preston, I said softly. The silence on the other end was absolute. The line crackled. I could hear his breathing, ragged and fast. You heard that? He whispered. I heard everything. I heard Serena call me nauseating. I heard you laugh. I heard you agree that I was only useful for the charity photos. I heard you say I smell like a nursing home. Mom, listen, it was just talk. We were stressed. Serena didn't mean it. She had a migraine. Stop, I commanded. My voice was not loud, but it had the authority of 40 years of maintaining order in a library. Do not lie to me. Not anymore. You utilized me. You drained my savings. You used my credit to fund a lifestyle you cannot afford, all while treating me with contempt behind my back. The bank account I opened for emergencies? You treated it like a piggy bank for your vanity. That money was for us. For the family. I am not your family, Preston. I am your sponsor, and the sponsorship has ended. Mom, please, you have to undo this. We can't refinance. My credit is leveraged to the hilt. If you pull your guarantee, we lose the penthouse. We lose everything. Then perhaps you should have thought about that before you bit the hand that fed you, I said. You have 30 days, Preston. I suggest you start packing. I hung up. Then I turned off my phone. The next morning, I woke up feeling a strange sensation. It was not happiness, but it was relief. The heavy cloak of anxiety I had worn for years, worrying about their approval, worrying about their finances, worrying if I was good enough, was gone. I began to make plans. I owned my triple-decker house in Dorchester outright. It was too big for me. It was filled with ghosts of a past life. I had held on to it because Preston had said he wanted to keep it in the family, another lie to keep me tethered. I called a real estate agent I knew. I want to sell, I told her. Fast. Cash offers only. Within a week, I had an offer. A developer wanted the land. It was a substantial sum, enough to buy a small cottage on the coast of Maine and still have plenty left over for a comfortable retirement. I signed the preliminary papers without a second thought. During that week, Preston and Serena escalated their war. They showed up at my door on a Tuesday night. I watched them through the peephole, Preston looking disheveled, his eyes wild, Serena looking furious, her perfect makeup smeared. I did not open the door. They pounded on the wood. They shouted, "Open the door, Margaret! You can't do this!" Serena screamed. It was a primal, ugly sound. The neighbors began to look out their windows. Mrs. Higgins across the street stepped onto her porch. I felt a flush of shame, but then I remembered the dead weight comment, and the shame turned to resolve. I called the police. "Yes, I would like to report trespassers," I told the dispatcher calmly. "No, I do not know them. They are strangers to me." Watching the police escort my son off my porch was the hardest thing I have ever done. Seeing him put into the back of a squad car, even just to be driven away, broke something inside me that can never be fixed. I cried for an hour afterwards, curling into a ball on the hallway floor, clutching a photo of him as a baby. But I did not call him back. I did not bail him out of his own mess. Then came the lawsuit. Arthur called me, his voice tight. "They are suing you, Margaret, for malicious interference and breach of verbal contract. They are claiming you promised to support them indefinitely." "Let them sue," I said, feeling the cold anger return. "They have no money for lawyers. They are bluffing." They were bluffing, but they were desperate. They launched a smear campaign on social media. Serena posted long, tearful videos, claiming her cruel mother-in-law was throwing them out on the street, out of jealousy. She claimed I was senile, that I was mentally unstable, that I was trying to control their marriage. I didn't respond. I didn't engage. I simply forwarded the links to Arthur, who added them to our file for a potential defamation countersuit. I let them scream into the void while I quietly packed my boxes. The 30-day deadline approached. The bank was not bluffing. The foreclosure notice was posted on the door of their penthouse. It was public record. The local business journals picked up the story. "Rising architect in financial ruin," the headlines read. Preston's investors pulled out. His firm, built on a foundation of debt and image, began to crumble. 3 days before the eviction, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize with an Ohio area code. "Mrs. Sullivan?" a timid voice asked. "Yes?" This is Sylvia, Serena's mother. I stiffened. I had met Sylvia only a handful of times at the wedding. She was a quiet, nervous woman who wore department store clothes and apologized for everything. Serena rarely spoke of her, embarrassed by her mother's working-class background. I have nothing to say to you, Sylvia, I said, preparing to hang up. Please, don't hang up, she pleaded. Her voice was trembling. I am not calling to ask you to change your mind. I am calling to apologize. I paused, my hand hovering over the end call button. Excuse me? I raised her, Sylvia said, her voice cracking with emotion. I raised Serena to value the wrong things. I thought if I pushed her to be successful, if I taught her to marry up, she wouldn't have to struggle like I did cleaning houses. But I created a monster. She called me yesterday, demanding I mortgage my house to save them. She screamed at me, she called me useless, she said I owed her. I closed my eyes, recognizing the pain in her voice. It was the universal language of mothers who had given too much and received nothing but scorn. I am so sorry, Sylvia, I whispered. I know what they did to you, Sylvia continued. I know about the money. I know about the insults. You are right to do what you are doing. I wanted one mother to tell another that you are not the villain here, no matter what they say on the internet. You are a survivor. Thank you, Sylvia, I said, my throat tight. That means a great deal coming from you. She has to learn, Sylvia said, sounding incredibly tired. Maybe hitting rock bottom is the only way she will ever become a human being again. Or maybe she won't. But we can't save them from themselves anymore. We hung up. That conversation was the closure I didn't know I needed. It validated that this wasn't just my bitterness. It was an objective reality. We had raised children who viewed us as resources, not people, and the extraction had to stop. The day of the foreclosure, I was already in Maine. I had bought a small, yellow cottage overlooking a rocky bay. It was miles away from the city, miles away from the pretension. It had a garden overrun with hydrangeas and a fireplace that smelled of cedar. I was unpacking my books, placing them on the shelves, when Arthur called. It is done, he said. The bank has taken possession of the penthouse. They were escorted out by the sheriff this morning. It was not a dignified exit. Where will they go? I asked. The question was involuntary, a reflex of the mother I used to be. I believe they are staying at a motel in Revere, Arthur said. Preston has filed for bankruptcy. His firm is dissolving. His car has been repossessed. I sat down on a box of books. I looked out the window at the gray ocean churning against the rocks. I should have felt triumphant. I had won. But I didn't feel like a winner. I felt like a survivor of a war I never wanted to fight. Thank you, Arthur, I said. Margaret, he added gently, you saved your life. Remember that. If you had stayed, they would have drained you until you were destitute. You would have ended up in a state-run facility while they drank champagne. You chose survival. I chose dignity, I corrected him. The months passed. The silence from Boston was absolute. I changed my number. I settled into the rhythm of the tides. I joined a local book club. I volunteered at the town library, reading to children. I began to heal. The nightmares where I heard Preston's laughter stopped. I started to sleep through the night without medication. I started to taste my food again. Winter came, turning the ocean into a frothing cauldron of white foam. I sat by my fire, knitting a scarf, finally at peace. I was no longer waiting for the phone to ring. I was no longer waiting for approval. One afternoon in December, a battered, rusted sedan pulled into my driveway. I watched from the window. Preston got out. He looked 10 years older. He was thinner, his face gaunt. He was wearing work boots, jeans with paint stains, and a heavy coat that looked worn at the elbows. He walked to the door and knocked. I opened it. I did not invite him in. I stood in the doorway, blocking the warmth of my home. Hello, Mom, he said. His voice was hoarse. Hello, Preston. He looked past me, into the cozy living room. It looks nice. It is. I wanted to see you. Why? He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. We are living in a basement apartment in Quincy. I'm working for a construction crew. Framing houses. It's hard work. My hands are blistered. I nodded, looking at his hands. They were rough, calloused. Honest work usually is. Serena left me, he said. His voice broke. About a month after the eviction, she said she didn't sign up for poverty. She's dating a hedge fund manager in New York now. She didn't even say goodbye. She just left a note. I felt a flicker of pity, but I stomped it out before it could grow into enabling behavior. I am sorry to hear that, Preston, but I am not surprised. Mom, he looked at me, his eyes filling with tears. I messed up. I know I messed up. I lost everything. I lost the firm. I lost the apartment. I lost my wife. You lost things, Preston, I said firmly. You lost objects. You lost an image. But you lost me a long time ago. Can you forgive me? He asked. He looked like the little boy who used to scrape his knees, waiting for me to kiss it better. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the arrogance stripped away, leaving a frightened, humbled man. Forgiveness is a process, Preston, I said. It is not a switch I can flip. You utilized me. You dehumanized me. You broke my heart to buy things. You let your wife treat me like garbage because it was convenient for you. I can pay you back. I will pay you back every cent. It might take years, but I will do it. I don't want your money, I said. I have enough. What I want is for you to understand why I did it. I do, he whispered. I really do. You were teaching me a lesson. No, Preston, I wasn't teaching you a lesson. I was saving myself. There is a difference. I sighed. The cold wind was biting at my face. I cannot fix your life, Preston. I won't. You have to build it yourself, brick by brick, just like you used to draw. But this time, you have to build it on a foundation of your own sweat, not my sacrifice. You have to know the value of $1 because you earned it, not because you stole it. Can I come in for a coffee? Just for a minute? It's cold out here? I hesitated. The old Margaret would have thrown the door wide open, made him a sandwich, given him a check, and smoothed his hair. But the new Margaret, the one forged in the fire of betrayal, knew better. Boundaries were not walls to keep people out. They were the structure that kept the house standing. If I let him in now, if I softened now, he would learn nothing. He would think that all he had to do was show up looking sad to get back in. Not today, I said gently. I am not ready for that. And frankly, neither are you. You didn't come here just to see me. You came to see if the safety net was still there. It isn't. He looked down at his boots. He nodded slowly. Okay, Mom. He turned to leave. He walked down the path, his shoulders hunched against the wind. Preston, I called out. He turned back, hope flaring in his eyes. Work hard, I said. Be a man you can actually respect. Be a man who defends the people who love him. That is the only way you will ever be happy. He stood there for a moment, the gray sky swirling above him. Thank you, Mom, he said. And for the first time in years, it sounded sincere. I watched him drive away until his car disappeared around the bend of the coastal road. I closed the door and locked it. I went back to my fireplace and picked up my knitting. I sat in the quiet warmth of the home I had saved for myself. I thought about the price of admission to this peace. It had cost me my relationship with my son. It had cost me the illusion of the perfect family. It was a high price, a terrible price. But as I looked around at my books, at the firelight dancing on the walls, at the life I had reclaimed from the ashes of their greed, I knew the truth. Dignity is expensive. It costs you friends. It costs you family. It costs you the comfort of the lie. But looking in the mirror and seeing a woman who respects herself, that is priceless. I poured myself a cup of tea, opened my book, and for the first time in my life, I began to read the story of my own future, a story where I was the protagonist, not the prop. And it was a beautiful story.